Good afternoon. This is Douglas Nelson with the Life Points podcast. Welcome back to Module 3 of this Life Points series. Today we're going to be discussing further intelligent energy. We've discussed in the first two modules the concepts of the power of three, the emphasis on focus, framework, and flow state, which we'll continue to talk more about, as well as the essential aspects of awareness, as we've defined kind of that undefined or that limitless version of conscious or source energy in life on the macro level and micro. And then today we're going to discuss more about intelligent energy, but we're also going to, as we often will, journey or navigate a little bit laterally to discuss some of the implications around what we mean when we talk about intelligent energy and when we talk about the concept that visible things that we see in the earth, the configuration of matter, comes from invisible sources, energy, more things in more of a flowing energy state. So we're going to talk about some of the implications of that. And just to re-emphasize, within Life Points, the goal here is to present what is useful to identify enough self-evident truths that it's not really about proof of one perspective being right or not, but providing enough details that self-evidently things may fall into place mentally in terms of a certain way of viewing the world. And this ties into that concept of framework. Framework meaning the beliefs, priorities, and viewpoints that we hold that are the most efficient, the most optimal for living life and for navigating through all the things, both conceptually and in living life, that we go through. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about the concept of that invisible energy and how it relates to some people's understanding of worldviews. Worldviews being, just the big picture way we assimilate or understand certain trends or patterns in life. So we're going to take the commonly understood thoughts around what scientifically, conceptualized as evolution, from a couple basic standpoints. And people, we know, mean a lot of different things when they talk about the evolution of something, let's say it's some technology, it's evolving to the next level. Many equate the evolution within the scientific community to adaptation, the ability of animals or nature to adapt and change based on their environment. But at a core level and as a worldview, we're going to define this idea of evolution, which may be in the backdrop of people's minds and the way that they view the universe, and discuss something that I think will help to clarify what we're talking about in terms of how intelligent energy operates. So in some aspects, and this is greatly simplifying, not intended to be scientific, viewpoints of evolution as a worldview on how the world began or emerges or continues to unfold, evolution states a couple things. One is that from an initial, small life form, from an initial kind of single unit life form, all things within the universe unfolded, grew, evolved. They came out of that. So whether you're talking about, a tiny, amoeba, or, whether you're talking about that initial spark of a single cell organism expanding outward to more and more complex organisms, that's what we're speaking of. Then secondly, evolution states that the current configuration or version of a creature or life form in nature will and can continue to evolve to a more complex form or even transform to a different one. So that's two basic things. It's saying how things started from that smallest and simplest state, and then how things unfold or evolve or transform in a current state that we may observe today. And I want to show that either way, even for those who ascribe to this as a worldview, it doesn't really say anything against or counter to the idea of intelligent energy being behind those activities or actions. So let's say that it is 100% true, somehow, we're just taking this theoretically, that life did evolve from a single life form or single organism, and that creatures today, even though we may not observe it all the time, they are able to transform into something completely different. A coyote at some point can evolve into something that's more akin to a bear or something even more different in nature. And I'm throwing out a lot of these just somewhat random examples, but I think enough to hopefully highlight the point that even if we're embracing some of the more stark aspects of what this evolution idea says, there's still some underlying truths that I think are helpful to highlight in our understanding of intelligent energy. Even in a universe, if that is the governing pattern, there's still something behind the scenes that is causing that first single-cell organism to begin, and that is causing the design structure within that, let's take the case of an animal, to change forms or to transform. It's still occurring because of something invisible behind the scenes changing its design or its coding. We understand from computers, major source of really science these days around how we change something within this digital universal sphere, and it creates changes on a surface sphere or a surface layer, such as a website interface or something else more concrete. The point there being, anytime you see something on, let's say, a series of web pages or a series of hyperlinks and how something connects together in cyberspace or digitally, there is a behind-the-scenes coding, often referred to as the front end and the back end for computer coding. So what is that coding? Well, it's basically the command language that tells the surface or manifest front end to operate in a certain way. And we could go further to say that anytime you have a manifest, presentable surface layer of reality of any kind, there is going to be a behind-the-scenes, invisible layer that governs that logic. You can, in some ways, say it's the invisible logic that creates that manifest paradigm. So we notice the same thing in creation. So regardless of how it happened, both way back at the beginning of the cosmos or moment by moment, however we're kind of viewing that in our daily lives, there is arguably a self-evident behind the scenes, or to use the computer analogy, back end set of coding and design, intelligent design, that is governing what occurs. So whether it's that initial life form or a life form, a creature, an animal transforming into something different all of a sudden, there still has to be a code level change that is occurring with a personal touch in that intelligent energy behind the scenes. So someone is doing that, or something intelligent within that energy, that invisible energy, is creating that change. This has massive implications in the way we structure and look at the world. It does flip some things around, whereas we might tend to think that what we observe is governed by certain material causes, or that everything is kind of a surface level or a material nature. This drives an approach even to Now, medicine, science, anything across the board, the idea that, for example, that consciousness exists in the brain, that it originates from the brain, and that by looking more closely at the brain and how it functions, we can understand how this complex operation of consciousness occurs. So that approach is really flipping things around. It's saying the material is the cause of the immaterial or invisible. Either way, a statement is being made about what is the governing or the kind of God initiating energy, whether it's understood to be the invisible layer or the visible. Now, because of the constraints and the confined qualities of the material layer, in other words, we're talking about matter, everything we see and observe, both in creation, nature, our own physical makeup and bodies and so forth, we know that those don't carry in every set location all the combinations of wants. In some ways, you could say that they do, but for this kind of this explanation, we're first saying that you have to have that invisible intelligent energy driving and governing everything that you see around you. So that makes sense as the kind of the governing and the originating quality within the universe. So when we think about this further, we can see clearly that intelligent energy has all these different categories of qualities that then manifest in the physical world. And we want to understand this so that we can really operate in alignment with it, that we can recognize that there is a governing force. We know because there are personalities within each of us as people, that this intelligent energy has a personality. We know that when we see viewpoints operating through people in different ways, we know that there is a governing viewpoint that amalgamates all of them and has experienced all of them in a way. And this is something else we'll get into more, is the creation feedback loop of experience, create and experience. So we'll see how intelligent energy emanates or manifests its own infinite qualities in finite ways that are manifestable and that are observable and perceivable by certain sensory elements within consciousness. And then the process by which that same intelligent energy fully experiences the results of that creation. Because, we know the essence of being someone is we're experiencing life from a certain viewpoint. And that's part of the miracle of life and walking through it in general. So there's really much that we can branch off from here. And throughout these modules and life points, we'll sometimes hone in on one area, widen back out, and then dig back into that same concept again in the future. Here I just wanted to highlight with different worldviews that people may have. You can even not necessarily spend as much time wrestling the right or wrong aspect of different worldviews, but really just look at the underlying themes around how something practically works or doesn't work. Using the computer science example again, there's really no courses in computer science or that computer programmers learn around what's right or wrong. This belief or these ideas in computer coding are right. These are wrong. You can think of it in those ways, but what I want to highlight is it's just spoken of in terms of what works and what doesn't. So a certain set of principles, when you input them into code, they create certain results within the digital or the internet interfaces, and other certain ideas don't. They don't create the desired effect. So there's a practicality we want to connect here that we already have in so many disciplines, such as computer programming, computer science, and that it's not about kind of the right and wrong, or kind of blaming one idea, but really and kind of upholding another, but rather observing ideas to see how closely they reflect what practically works, what's practically occurring, what's occurring this very moment as you're listening to this module, this very moment as you're perceiving input and data. The very fact that you're taking in information means that there is an invisible component, an energy behind everything in your own consciousness. And so, many refer to these things in different ways. And I want to emphasize too, again, in Life Points, we want to focus on what's helpful. So if a certain term or label has an association of ideas or viewpoints or resistances to it, you may have to lightly shrug it off and plug in your mind what that term means or what's intended by it. So that it's most helpful. So, for example, the idea of the soul in the context of what we're talking about would be the localized, invisible element of intelligent energy that is comprising your whole personality and who you are. And obviously there are many layers we can and will discuss in terms of personality versus soul versus heart, will, all these different elements. We want to simplify and break down just enough to where it's not about going into minutia and splitting hairs on different views of things, but enough to where we can effectively identify trends in how things operate in existence. And so in the next module, we'll look more into this and dig especially into consciousness itself. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining in on today's podcast, Module 3. We'll see everyone next time.